Hello and welcome to video 2 for Unit 2 Cognition. This video is going to focus on the mental process of thinking. At the end of this video, you should be able to answer the following question. How do psychological concepts and theories account for thinking, problem solving, judgment, and decision making? So, like I talked about at the beginning of this unit, cognition is everything that is happening inside of our brain. This includes our attention, our language, the learning that we have, our memory, perception, and thought. And this particular video is going to really focus on that thought and problem solving. So let's first start with the idea of metacognition. This is kind of a weird concept, but it's one that's important for us to learn as psychologists as well as students. So metacognition simply is thinking about our thinking. We often talk about metacognition as a reflection of how we think or how we solve problems. And this is very important when it comes to psychology because we are constantly thinking about how and why we think the way we do. So how do we organize our thinking? First, we have concepts. Concepts are our mental groups of similar objects, events, ideas, or people. Then we have our schema. And our schema are the characteristics or the features of a particular concept. So, for example, a concept might be a dog. The schema are the characteristics about that dog. So, furry, 4 legs, a tail, and it barks. Then we also have what are called prototypes. Prototypes are the typical or best example of that concept that demonstrate the list of characteristics or the schema. So, for example, it would be the first picture that comes to mind when I tell you to think about a dog. Maybe it's a golden retriever or a yellow lab, or maybe it's a chihuahua. Who knows? But your prototype is your best example of the concept. We talked about schema in our last video. Schema help us make sense of the world around us. When we see new information coming in, we need to decide what we're going to do with that information. And so when we have this new information, we can either assimilate the new information or we can accommodate the new information. So for example, in this image, you can see that the little girl already knows what a dog is because she has a dog. In the pink frame, you can see she sees a new piece of information, what we know as a cat. However, she's never seen a cat before, so she immediately uses her already existing schema of a dog to make sense of that new piece of information. And so she calls this new animal a dog. She has assimilated her new information into her already existing schema. Sometimes we determine that this new information, the new animal, doesn't quite fit into our already existing schema of a dog, where the dad is explaining the difference between a cat and a dog. A cat is meowing, a dog is barking. So now the young girl is going to accommodate her already existing schema to create a separate schema for cat and for dog. So another example of this is, let's just say a person comes to our school who is wheelchair bound. In our school, our elevator only goes up to the 2nd floor. And so how would this person get to the 3rd floor? If we are assimilating our school, we are going to use the already existing structures that are in place in order to get that person up to the 3rd floor. So the person might be carried up to the 3rd floor. We might move our current classes from the 3rd floor down to the 2nd floor, but we're not going to change anything about our school. We haven't created anything new. We haven't constructed a new ramp or anything like that. We've just used what's already in place. This is called assimilation. Accommodation would be we are constructing or changing our school in order to fit the needs of this person. So now if we need this person to get up to the 3rd floor, we would maybe make the elevator come all the way up to the 3rd floor, or we would construct a ramp to get that person up to the 3rd floor. This would be an example of accommodation. So when we get new information coming into our body, we need to determine, are we going to assimilate that information into our already existing schema, or are we going to accommodate and create a new schema for that information? The next thing we're going to talk about is our dual process model of thinking. The dual process model is a theory that provides an account of how thought can arise in two different ways, or as a result of two different processes. Often these two processes consist of an implicit or automatic unconscious process and an explicit or controlled conscious process. So our system one thinking is going to be our fast, automatic, and emotional thinking. This is kind of what we call our gut instinct. This is our impulse or our drive. These are our habits or our beliefs. These are things that we really don't have to think about very often. We just kind of jump to that conclusion. System one thinking, while it might be fast and might help us create shortcuts, it's often prone to error when we are using system one thinking. System two thinking is going to be slow and effortful, logical. This is going to require some reflection, some planning, some problem solving, using strategies in order to get to the best result. While system two might be slow, it is very reliable because we are going to go through the process of making sure that it is the best option for that particular situation. In the real world, we are going to use both system one and system two thinking in order to experience the world around us. Sometimes we need to rely on system one thinking in order to make quick judgments. Other times it's necessary for us to slow down and really think through a problem. But these two systems work together in order for our brain to work reliably. System one and two thinking rely on different types of processing in order to make sense of the world. System one thinking requires automatic processing. Automatic processing is our unconscious processing of incidental or well-learned information. For example, this is our processing of space, time, and frequency. We don't necessarily need to think about what time of day or how long things took. Our brain automatically processes that information with very little effort on our part. Effortful processing, on the other hand, requires active processing of information. This requires sustained effort. Oftentimes, this will require us to rehearse information over and over again in order to fully process or understand that information. Effortful processing is when we are learning new information. For example, this information you're learning in the video right now. It's not automatic. In order for you to completely understand the difference between system one and two and automatic versus effortful processing, you're going to have to rehearse this information and use examples in order to better understand it. Think about learning how to drive. When you first learned the information of how to drive, you needed to pay attention and actively give effort to turning the turn signal on, turning the steering wheel the correct way, pushing down on the gas pedal. That used sustained effort while you were learning that process. However, over time, this information becomes automatic because we know it really well. And so now the process of driving has become an automatic process. You don't need to think through every single little part of driving. There are different types of effortful processing as well. We have deep and shallow processing. There are two different types of effortful processing. We have deep and shallow processing. Deep processing is when we are putting information into our brain with respect to its meaning. This is where I have told you over and over again, make the information meaningful to you. This requires you to think at a deeper level. Shallow processing, on the other hand, is based on the surface characteristics of that information. For example, if I ask you to remember the word hippocampus, shallow processing would be processing that information based on the letters that make up the word. Just being able to recognize that the word is spelled Hippocampus. However, deep processing would be remembering the word hippocampus based on its meaning. so that the hippocampus is used to transfer memories from short-term to long-term memory. Now let's go on to problem solving. So in addition to thinking, our brain needs to solve problems throughout the day. Executive function refers to the set of neurocognitive skills involved in goal-directed problem solving, including our working memory, inhibitory control, and set shifting and flexibility. A really fancy way of saying our memory, our flexibility, our self-control. We use all these skills every day to learn, to work, to manage our daily life. And trouble with executive functioning can make it hard to function and focus and follow directions. This also can lead to problems handling our emotions. And so executive functioning refers to all of those different aspects of our thinking in order to make sense of the world around us. In order to solve new problems, our brain likes to use different strategies in order to solve these problems. The first is an algorithm. An algorithm is a methodical, logical rule or procedure that guarantees solving a particular problem. Let's say our problem is that we need to find the olives at the grocery store. The algorithm for finding those olives would be walking down every single aisle and looking at every shelf until I find the olives. Algorithms use system 2 thinking. It's reliable, it's logical, however, it's very slow. We're going to get the correct answer eventually. We're going to find the olives eventually, but it's going to take us a very long time. And I told you before, our brain is lazy. Our brain likes to take shortcuts. So the way that our brain likes to do this is what we call heuristics. Heuristics are simple thinking strategies that often allow us to make judgments and solve problems efficiently. This is what we use when we are using system 1 thinking. So if we're using our olives example, and I'm trying to find the olives in the grocery store, a heuristic for finding the olives would be to either go ask someone for help who knows the store, or to look at the signs on the aisles, or to know that olives come in a can, so you're going to go buy the other canned goods. Heuristics allow us to find the answer a lot quicker, but it's going to be prone to error because maybe that person you ask doesn't know where the olives are, or they tell you the wrong location. Some examples of heuristics that you need to know are the representativeness heuristic is judging the likelihood of things or objects in terms of how well they seem to represent or match a particular prototype. It allows us to make quick judgments. So for example, if I ask you to think in your mind about a pilot named Alex, Alex is coming into your classroom to talk about what it's like to be an airline pilot. And I'm telling you about this person, how they're well educated and well put together, and then walks in a woman. Does this woman surprise you? It might, because maybe your prototype or your best representation of a pilot named Alex is a man. And so representativeness heuristic allows us to put a picture to something based on how likely they represent our current prototype of that object. Another example of a heuristic that you need to know is the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is a cognitive shortcut in which the probability of an event is determined by how easily the event can be brought to mind. You choose the alternative that is most mentally available to you. An example of this might be you being afraid to swim in the ocean because you've seen many accounts of shark attacks happening in the ocean. While the actual probability of you getting attacked by a shark in the ocean is very low, but because this information is readily available to us on TikTok or on social media, we are likely to determine that that event is likely to happen. Another heuristic you need to know is the anchoring bias. And the anchoring bias is a cognitive shortcut when we rely too heavily on an initial piece of information offered. This is considered to be the anchor when making decisions. An example of anchoring bias would be when a corporation offers you a low salary to start the negotiation process. You're focusing on this low salary and not where you want to be. And so you're likely to accept a lower salary than you maybe would have in the first place. Another way that we solve problems is using insight. And insight involves a sudden, novel realization of a solution to a problem. This is kind of that aha moment. And usually, insight is based on prior experience and initial trial and error to gain that insight. An example of insight when solving a problem is using your understanding of where you last were in order to find your lost keys. So now that we have talked about different ways that we solve problems, let's talk about some obstacles that we face when solving problems. The first is our mental set. A mental set is our tendency for old patterns of problem solving to persist and make it impossible for us to see new ways to solve the problem. An example of a mental set might be trying to solve a math problem using your same strategies, even though that math problem cannot be solved using your known strategies. You need to think outside the box. A specific example of a mental set would be functional fixedness. And this is our tendency to think of only the familiar or typical functions for an object. For example, if I am trying to open my Amazon box, but all I have around me are a set of keys, I know that my set of keys is used to lock and unlock my door. I am facing the problem of opening this box and I don't have a box cutter or a scissors, and I cannot overcome the functional fixedness of my key. Now, to overcome functional fixedness, I might realize, oh, I can use my keys to open the box. But if I don't realize that, I have run into the problem of functional fixedness. Another obstacle to problem solving is priming. And priming is the idea that exposure to one stimulus can influence how someone responds to a subsequent stimulus, often without conscious awareness. Priming is used often to get you to think a certain way. In game shows, they'll often give you a category of things that you're trying to guess so that you can think in a certain way when guessing words. Another obstacle to problem solving is framing. And framing is a cognitive bias that describes how the way information is presented can affect your decision making. For example, if you're at the grocery store and you're buying meat, you are definitely going to be drawn to a package of meat that says 75% lean meat rather than a package that says 25% fat meat. Just the way that we frame the particular situation helps you think in a certain way toward that information. Another example might be if a doctor frames his surgical success rate as 95% success, you're likely to think positively about that success rate. But if he frames it as, well, I have a 5% failure rate, now you're thinking negatively. So framing shapes the way that we think about a piece of information. Another obstacle is the gambler's fallacy. The gambler's fallacy is a psychological bias where someone believes that the probability of a random event happening changes based on previous event or a series of events. This is often seen in gambling. Someone might believe that after a long run of black on the roulette wheel, red is more likely to occur. This isn't the truth. It's always chance. You always have the same percentage of getting red versus black. However, because you've seen black happening over and over and over again, you think that red is now most likely to happen. Another obstacle is the sunk cost fallacy. And the sunk cost fallacy is our tendency to continue with an endeavor we've invested money, effort, or time into, even if the current costs outweigh the benefits. The absolute best example of this is the fact that I still continue to watch Grey's Anatomy after 21 seasons when I'm over it. I've invested so much time into this series that I need to know how it ends, even though I'm not enjoying the show anymore. The final obstacle that we're going to talk about is the confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is our human tendency to only seek out information that supports one position or idea. If you are looking for evidence to support your political views, you're going to go on the internet and look for information that supports that political view. We do this all of the time, and it's easy for us to then exclude all of the other information that might go against our currently held beliefs. All of these things that we've talked about on this slide are examples of how our thinking and our problem solving can be influenced by our past expectations, and experiences. Next, let's talk about creativity. Creativity is a type of thinking, and there's 5 components to creativity: expertise, imagination, adventuresome personality, intrinsic motivation, and creative environment. All of these things work together in order to encourage creativity in problem solving. There are 2 different types of thinkers in the world. Convergent thinkers narrow down all of the possible solutions into one correct solution. Divergent thinkers brainstorm different options. They look outside of the box. So convergent thinking is less creative than divergent thinking. All of these different types of thinking and problem solving are ways that we go about the world and make sense of new information that is coming in.